All right, hello. My name is Karson Backer, and I am a junior at Dickinson State University. And this spring semester, I took labor relations with Professor Costas. And for our final presentation, he told us to pick one of the four subjects that he posted to present or write a paper on. I chose to present, and I'm going to do on unions because I didn't really know a lot about them and I wanted to learn more. And I just knew what we covered in class, but that was kind of a very basic information. And I will get into it. So I'm covering labor unions bridge the gap, and my table of contents. I will go over an abstract of just what everything I'll cover, and then I'll go through the history of the unions and everything that they entailed from the first recorded unions to how they are today. And then I'll go from today looking forward. And then we'll look at two case studies I found. And then I'll share a summary of my findings and what I think of unions now after I did all my research on it. And then I will present my resources that I used throughout this project. So my abstract, unions created as a bridge between employers and their many employees. So when unions first started, they were because there were too many employees for the employer to keep personal relationships with. So the employees needed some sort of representation to fill that void. And then they needed that representation to be fair for all workers. And this started in labor and trade unions, where many workers belong to today. And then representation not always correct against big business. So when there are suits filed against big business from unions, they aren't always correct, but that's just with any lawsuit. Not always are you going to win. Not always is the winner going to be the one that you want, if that makes sense. The union can't win every time, just as big business can't win every time. And then when I give you all this information, I'll present my opinions on the union. So, history of labor unions. Industrial Revolution in Europe in the 18th century is when unions first started because employment skyrocketed, and the need for representation, as I stated before, was to fill that gap between the relationships between employers and employees, because there was so many they couldn't keep those relationships in contact. And the American Federation of Labor is the most famous union because it was the first one to cover all labor union in the early time of unions. And this is all from Union Plus website, where they provide public information of the unions, and it's just all unions, not just certain ones. And the peak of unions in the United States was in 1945, and this was just following World War II and the Great Depression. So this makes sense because now there was a need for a big boom of jobs and industry workers and blue-collar field where we all needed to bound together. And this formed many unions for the fact that there were so many jobs and the employment rate was so high. And that was industrial jobs mostly, not really many white-collar jobs at the time in the 40s. And then in 2015 on the website, it stated that union membership rate was at 11.1% of the whole workforce. So that equates to 14.8 million, which actually seems like a very high number, even though since 1970, the union rates have actually been declining. So that's actually lower than it probably should be if they were to be steady. And then the current union status, looking forward now that we're back into like 2015 to 2020 range, labor unions are and have been on a decline, as I stated earlier, and that correlates with the employment rate also, but not always. Sometimes it's a direct relation, because obviously if there's more workers, there's more memberships in unions, and if there's less workers, those memberships could be dropped from the people that did lose jobs. And then there is a green economy movement going on where unions and companies as a whole are having to refine their strategies and their policies to what's the word, to kind of counter the green economy that's coming in. So they have to adapt to environmental issues that still relate to their economical needs. So they still have to make profit, but they still want to help out with their environment. And this is forcing more white collar memberships because blue collar fields aren't as common anymore, or not common. They're not as normalized as they were before in like the 40s and 50s when it was booming. So, and the representation for white collar memberships is different than blue, but that is also brought up in Can Unions Survive by Charles B. Craver, where he talked about how that big difference in representation and how you have to adapt to that. And then we'll move on to the popular employee unions nowadays. So these I looked up on AZ Central. It's a news outlet in Arizona. And they researched all the unions that are in use today and how many memberships are on that union. And these are listed in descending order from population. The National Education Association has over 3 million subscribers, or memberships, I'm sorry. And that is for teachers, educators, other like school memberships, school board, stuff like that. The Service Employees International Union, that's those white collar jobs that we were talking about. They have about 1.9 million. The American Federation of Teachers, another teacher one, 1.5 million, a little bit over. International Brotherhood of Teamsters, 1.4 million. American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, that'd be like your state senate or your city senate treasurer, stuff like that, right around 1.3 million. United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, 1.3 million, and then the United Steelworkers, 1.2 million. And that United Steelworkers was a really old one I remember looking up because it's still there from the American Industrial Revolution. So we'll move on to the case studies. So I looked up I found two case studies where they talked about a union versus policy, a union policy versus a company policy, and where they had to update it to favor the employees a little more. And this is where the union, where either the union one or the union and the company had to adjust their policies, but it was kind of a win for both of them for the union. And this first one is fighting for equal treatment, and this one was about here's a little quote right at the beginning. United Auto Workers address issues of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and transsexual members. So this is talking about equality with the LGBTQ group and how they were being misrepresented by their unions, and they weren't getting the right policies, and they were being discriminated. And this discrimination came through whether they weren't hired because of their sexual orientation, or they weren't getting the benefits that everyone else was, or if they had a grievance with the employer, they couldn't bring it up because of they knew that they wouldn't even get a shot at it. And I completely agree with the points that Monica Boris brought up in this, where they should just get the normal treatment. It seems so simple and ethical to treat them normal. If they do their job and don't cause any issues among their relationships within their job, why not just treat them as any other member in the union? And then the second one, the role of labor education in transforming a union toward organizing immigrants. So this one is kind of the same leaf, different subject. It's the unions aren't treating immigrants with respect and treating them normal. So, a quote to start this one, another one was, one of the ways unions need to change internally concerns relationships with non-traditional workers such as immigrants. So, immigrants, when they first came over, when they weren't so immigrant, it was just during when America was first starting, when it was like German, Swedish, the typical European immigrants, people were very mad that they were coming over and stealing jobs. Not so much stealing, it's just a job. And they came over with this fraternity mindset where they wanted to be around other people of the same ethnicity as them, the same cultural background, which is a psychological norm. Like, you just want to be around people that think like you. So this led to unionization because they wanted to back each other up. And therefore, the immigrants should be represented and educated so then they can get unions to form all their employees rather than just sectors like, oh, here's the Germans, here's the Swedes, here's the whatever. And then today, that's a past instance that they brought up to relate to today in South Florida, where the workforce is mostly immigrants from Cuba, Mexico, the islands, stuff like that. And the early attitudes of the union was that, oh, they're not good enough to enter the union. But that relates right back to the LGBTQ one. Like, it's too simple to just let them be. And the fact that now this one is where immigrants need to be educated enough to fight that they need to be in a union. The LGBTQ, they were educated, but they just have no say, really. So these ones, they want to get immigrants educated so they can get into a union. And like I said before, if they do their work, and with this case, if they're legal immigrants, I feel like they should have a shot at a union. And if they don't cause problems and they make good relationships, why not just include them? So overall, my summary that I found, going into this, I wasn't very familiar with unions at all. I knew, like, my older brother works at a power plant. I knew he was in a union, but I didn't know what that entailed. I had the base knowledge that we learned in class that, oh, they represent employees when they have a grievance with an employer, but this opened my eyes to the fact that they do a lot of stuff for their employees. Like I said, they were formed in the early 1800s, which was way earlier than I thought. I would have figured like the 1930s, like during the Great Depression. But, excuse me, during that Industrial Revolution in Europe is when it was first formed, and then it has transformed into today's labor unions representing members all over the world. And I think unions are an extremely feasible idea, and they help millions of people. So I don't see really any negatives other than the fact that they do misrepresent some people. But I think my logic would be over-representation would be more applicable than under or misrepresentation. So, like, why not? I would rather have somebody that's overly confident and wants to help me than somebody who is just kind of, we'll help you if we can. If, like, you know what I mean? And hopefully during this green industry thing that I was talking about earlier, while they're tweaking their policies and stuff, hopefully they can tweak some of their other norms to make it more attractive to a wider variety of people, so then they could boost their membership numbers and help even more people through their grievances. And in both case studies, like I said before, they allude to the fact that all members deserve representation. Like, all workers need the fact, that comfort that, oh, if I slip up, it's not, oh, I'm out of my job. It's that I can actually fight, that I need representation and just cause. They can't just fire me just because. And then there are my resources. They're all right there. I've got 8 of them. And I thank you for listening to me, and hopefully you learned as much as I did throughout this whole thing. I definitely will put thought to unions in the future when I get jobs, and hopefully if I get an HR job, I'll be working with a couple unions, and that'll be a good experience to see how their thought processes work. And thank you again.